I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Get healthy. Get healthy.
I mix what I like, what I
We're
like.
here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
Yes, with the wrong background. Good morning, but shout out to Saturdays with Renee. We had a great time this Saturday. I hope you all check it out. If you have not already, salute to her and the great discussion we had. And yeah, but welcome everybody to I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Greetings to you on this, what I hope is a wonderful Monday morning. We are not live. I'm on my way to my 4-4. Happy to do so. Happy to do so. Couple sections of intro to Black studies, and then public policy and persuasion, or the sociology of mass communication. Just wonderful day ahead for me. I hope yours is at minimum as good. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org. All the links are in the show description. Put this in your socials. Invite others to join you as we continue to celebrate 100 years of Malcolm X, which will culminate on his 100th birthday, May 19th. Again, salute to...
You just don't read, beloved.
for inspiring this series and to all of you for your continued support. Once again, welcome. Before we get started, again, thanks to everybody who continues to support this show and this platform. Also had some fun Saturday evening. So please check that out as well if you haven't. And get yourself set for a great week of remix morning shows, the best morning show ever. I honestly think that, actually. I mean, I know we might tend towards hyperbole from time to time, but I actually legitimately think that the only thing others have had ever is some resources for production elements and stuff like that. But other than that, given what we have to work with, it really does not get any better. I don't think ever. I've watched a lot of TV my entire life. And I'm even struggling to think. I mean, there's, been a lot of good TV, a lot of good morning television, radio even. And I just think what the remix does is better than them all. No disrespect. In some cases, disrespect. But, for the most part, no, so. But okay, so again, sort of serendipitously, I just went and grabbed a few articles just to see what folks. I was doing it these last couple of weeks. This has been some fun. Articles are relatively easily digestible time wise, and fit within my schedule and make this series possible. And it's been a lot of fun to do it. And I found a couple that are great for extending the conversations we've been having here throughout these last what is this, 8 weeks? This is week 9. So let's get right to it. Please, again, as I pull these up, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, do all those things, put this in your socials. But I want to start here with this article by Walter Rucker, Crusader in Exile, Robert Williams. Crusader in Exile, Robert F. Williams and the International Struggle for Black Freedom in America. I will continue to put the links in the show description, or at least the full citation. I'll make sure it's in the show description. But because I'm not going to do either of these articles their full due or justice. But what they have to say, in the context of, well, really anything, but what we've been doing in this series is just really, I thought, quite fascinating. And Robert F. Williams is one of my favorites. He and Mabel Williams are, of course, legendary. Please check the Freedom Archives audio book on Negroes with Guns. If you haven't heard that, obviously read the book. I regret that one of my favorite interviews in my previous radio life at WPFW 89.3 FM, shout out to Pacifica, the black side of Pacifica, and but was with the late Mabel Williams, who I will always note asked us not to focus in that moment on the relationship between the Vietnamese liberation struggle in Vietnam being inspired in what was said to her and Robert at one point by Vietnamese leadership, by the Crusader newsletter that they were publishing, that inspired the Tet Offensive. Oh, that was great. I unfortunately don't know where that audio is, but anyway, yeah, but and the short of it, of course, is that Robert Williams was enormously inspirational to Malcolm X in terms of his leadership in the Monroe, North Carolina chapter of the NAACP, and uh, again, Negroes with Guns, he took from a cleaned up version of what white folks were saying upon realizing that Robert and his crew had armed themselves as a matter of self defense against white vigilante violence. And what are these Negroes doing with guns? And Robert Williams set, of course, to write a classic book and to be part of a bridge between traditions of armed resistance, generationally and geographically, even, and inspired Malcolm. And when the two eventually met, and as we'll talk a little bit about here, there's an important political transmission that occurs that will carry us off into the next article as well. So yeah, just skipping ahead a little bit because I wanted to focus specifically on what was said in here about the relationship between Robert and Malcolm. As Eldridge Cleaver later commented, Robert Williams and Malcolm X stand as two titans, even prophetic figures, who heralded the coming of the gun, the day of the gun, and the resort to armed struggle in Afro-America. While Black militancy may indeed date back to the colonial era, 1959 and the emergence of Williams and Malcolm X represented a significant reawakening of this spirit. I also credit Williams with, playing an important role in not only internationalist and militant politics, but media work. And who asked me to do that? I think it was Claude Marks of the Freedom Archives who asked me some years ago to go to the National Archives down the road here in Maryland. And over the years, I've always kind of liked living somewhat relatively close to that because I like when from the few times it's happened, people have asked if I could help them find something, and it's great experience. I remember looking at the files they had there for the Abolitionist Law Center, I think, of Russell Maroon Schultz. Just so much, just in terms of what they leave out, overtly, so many records and stories and reports about Schultz. Rest in power. And that time, I'm sure I've talked about it here probably a lot, but or many times, but going to the National Archives on behest of the Freedom Archives to try to see what they had available in terms of the surveillance of the Radio Free Dixie broadcasts that Robert and Mabel conducted from Cuba, which this article says reached all the way up into parts of Canada. And because they had a 50,000 watt station, as this article points out, and which is exactly the wattage of WPFW when I was there, by the way, which is fascinating. And you could hear, it was not good audio at all, but you could hear some of what the FBI was recording from Robert's broadcasts. And it was fascinating. And you could even hear sometimes the agents sort of communicating with one another, which is, anyway. So it was just salute on that is to the Williamses for that work. By 1958, Williams was gaining powerful allies. He first met Malcolm X that year who was so impressed with the North Carolina militant that he raised money and helped purchase weapons for the Monroe NAACP. He also invited Williams several times to speak at the Nation of Islam's Temple No. 7 in Harlem, where Malcolm presided as minister. This was just the beginning of a long-standing bond between the two men. Roy Wilkins had suspended Williams from the NAACP, and Williams then turned his attention, it says here, to the creation of the newsletter, which would, in his words, inform both Negroes and whites of Afro-American liberation struggles taking place in the United States and about the particular struggle we were constantly fighting in Monroe. And of course, as I said, this Crusader would also influence, allegedly, based on what was said to them at one point. You could check it out in the Freedom Archives audiobook. By Vietnamese leadership, the Crusader encouraged the Vietnamese to engage in guerrilla warfare, to come out of the jungles and into or to take the guerrilla warfares out of the jungle into the city, or cities, I should say, with the Tet Offensive. Thus, the first edition of the Crusader was born, issued on 26 June 1959. Williams then became the Southern counterpart to Malcolm X. And both men during the summer of 1959 would be in the national spotlight as advocates of self-defense and retributive violence. Just connecting the work of Williams to Fanon, Mao, and Malcolm. The axiom "there is strength in numbers" was self-evident. Truth to Williams and his efforts to link international struggles against white supremacy and European imperialism were mirrored later by Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, and the Black Panther Party. The first edition of Crusader and Exile offers a clear assessment of the use of force in the struggle against oppression. Force and violence can no longer be monopolized by the self-righteous white oppressor, whose longevity it enhances by cringing docile and isolated blacks. Our objective is to unite the Afro-American struggle with the struggle of oppressed peoples everywhere. This effort to build coalitions in the non-white world and his support of black nationalist organizations forced Williams to cross paths and swords with the Communist Party USA. Williams objected to the CPUSA's demands that he distance himself from black Muslims, noting pious whites should abolish racism among their own people before they can consider themselves qualified to ascertain what constitutes racism among Negroes. These statements in support of black nationalism upset his benefactors in the Cuban government and precipitated Williams' departure from the island in 1965. That's disappointing to read or be reminded of. Previous to that, Castro had allowed Williams to join the staff of Radio Progreso in July 1962, granting him access to a 50,000-watt radio station with enough power to reach Saskatchewan, Canada. Airing 3 days a week, listeners heard Radio Free Dixie broadcasts in Monroe, Harlem, and Detroit. And in certain FBI offices. Malcolm X, immediately after his break with the Nation of Islam, gave due credit to Williams in a phone-in radio show hosted by Joe Rainey in Philadelphia. In response to a question posed by a listener, Malcolm stated, "Robert Williams was just a couple of years ahead of his time, but he laid a good groundwork. He will be given credit in history for the stand that he took prematurely." While admitting that Williams had made some mistakes in Monroe, Malcolm also contends that he was on the right track and may have achieved more success if he could have expanded his movement beyond Monroe, North Carolina. And I wonder what, be interesting to go back and hear what Malcolm actually meant by those mistakes. I thought this was an important point, something always good to remember and remind folks of Malcolm's ongoing impact and influence on successive organizations, including the Black Panther Party, where we're reminded here that Huey Newton credits the writings of Williams and Malcolm X, along with the influential actions of the Louisiana-based Deacons for Defense and Justice, and the Lowndes County Freedom Organization for creating a foundation upon which the Black Panther Party was built. In 1968, Eldridge Cleaver proclaimed Williams has made as much impact as Malcolm because he hurled a challenge at both white mother country and the Black colony. Let the issue be settled by war. Let the Black colony take up arms against the mother country, end quote. Robert Williams profoundly shaped Black militancy. His public statements in favor of armed self-defense and the actions of the Monroe chapter of the NAACP were certainly factors explaining the near disappearance of the waves of anti-Black lynching and race riots that characterized the post-Reconstruction South. Nothing of the massive lynching waves of the 1890s and the 1920s, nor the extensive race riots of 1919 or 1943 would ever be seen again in the U.S. For better or worse, the direction of racial violence had largely reversed. Outside of individual and sporadic incidents, and the voices of Williams and Malcolm X contributed in part to this phenomenon. This is a very interesting point. One similarly, somewhat echoed by Jalil Muntaqeen in We Are Liberators, that the actions of the Black Liberation Army reduced the violence suffered by Black communities by the police. It's at minimum an interesting claim. In later years, Malcolm X, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, Kwame Ture, and others would also use the UN as a forum for which African Americans could raise legitimate concerns about civil and human rights in the U.S. This is something that comes up again in what we're going to look at next. But anyway, just wanted to start with that article there. Very interesting one. Again, it's primarily about the Crusader in Exile, Robert Williams and the International Struggle for Black Freedom in America by Walter Rucker. But what it says there about Malcolm X and his political friendship, foreshadowing with, in this case, Robert Williams. So, but as we get ready to move on, everybody, please do like, share, subscribe. If you can, support the Patreon at blackliberationmedia.org for more on how you can support, donate, just keep up with all the shows. And I hope you are having as good a Monday as possible. Oh, wow. I actually forgot about the interesting coincidental confluence of Passover and Easter. And how these ostensibly separate and distinct religions overlap. So I'm just looking up here quickly. Passover this year ended yesterday, April 20th, 420. Dun, 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 dun. It's like, and of course, Easter Sunday was yesterday, 420. And just confirming quickly, that when is, yeah. Oh, okay. So shortly, so this year, the beginning of the spring equinox was March 20th. But just that, just the coincidence of spring, Easter, and Passover all occurring at least around, relatively speaking, maybe not exactly on the day, where the sun is crucified on the cross as it crosses the equator, where you get 3 days of 12 hours of day and night equally divided, where, as was said in some segments of Kemet, the depicted by the hair leaping up because it's the spring, the sun leaping up, or being resurrected. It's fascinating. It's just fascinating coincidences. It's all pretty interesting, So I hope everybody enjoyed however they celebrate, whatever you're celebrating, even just 420, even if you just celebrate 420. But and then I just watched a fascinating discussion again of the absence of evidence for whatever. Just fascinating. But let's proceed. As we with 100 years of Malcolm X, who said we got to keep our religion in the closet so we can be about the political business of the day. So let me get back on my own message, on his message. By bringing up this next article, which we'll spend a little bit more time with, because it is again equally fascinating. And salute to all these folks doing all this fascinating work. You know what I mean? This is fascinating. Brother Malcolm, Comrade Babu, Black Internationalism and the Politics of Friendship by Seth Markle. Again, I will make sure the citations are all left in the show description, and I'll let folks procure the article however is most convenient. But the politics of friendship, I thought this was very interesting. I also like this reminder. I'm gonna employ this and make this. You know what I'm saying? Why do people? You know what? While I have this while I'm being interrupted, I know nobody in our audience would do this. Pull up in front of somebody's house and honk. I know we would call them at this point. You don't even have to get out of the car anymore with cell phones. Text them, say I'm outside. We don't need to pull up in front of everybody's buildings and houses, honking horns unnecessarily. You know what I'm saying? Again, forgive me, but I'm definitely going to employ this. I'm going to put the word out that when it's many years from now, no, definitely, no hurry. When it's my turn to become grandpa, this is what I want to be, because I've already been asked a couple times, what do you want to be? How do you want to be referred to? And I'm going to say as Babu, Kiswahili for grandfather. That's this. You call me Babu, and it will be distinct. So everybody will know he's the grandfather in question here. No disrespect to what will be the other set of grandparents, but this will be distinct. Although maybe not. You never. Anyway. But on December 13, 1964, at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York City, Malcolm X offered these intimate words, that is, these introductory words here. So, brothers and sisters, again, at this time, a very good friend of mine. I'm honored to call him my friend. He treated me as a brother when I was in Dar es Salaam. I met his family. I met his children. He's a family man. Most people don't think of revolutionaries as family men. All you see him in his image, all you see him in is his image on the battle line. But when you see him with his children and with his wife and that atmosphere at home, you realize that revolutionaries are human beings too. So here's a man who's not only a revolutionary, but he's a husband. He could be yours. He's a father. He could be yours. He's a brother. He could be yours. And I say he's ours. Sheikh Babu. These were the intimate words of praise offered to Abdul Rahman Muhammad, affectionately known as Babu, Kiswahili for grandfather, one of the key engineers in Zanzibar's socialist revolution and a government minister of the newly formed United Republic of Tanzania. Between UN diplomatic meetings and engagements, Babu ventured uptown to Harlem to speak at the Audubon Ballroom at the bequest of Malcolm X, a friend of only 6 months. His comments did not deviate from his scripted opening remarks, that is Malcolm X, as he was still speaking, awaiting Babu, with the theme of corporate media and Cold War representations of African political leadership. Again, obviously, perfectly relevant still in 2025, unfortunately. Malcolm's subsequent humanistic portrayal of Babu as a family man and revolutionary contrasted sharply with portrayals of Babu in the U.S. national press. When the Zanzibar Revolution broke out in East Africa in January of 1964, Babu was routinely condemned and villainized. According to the Washington Post and New York Times, the Zanzibari radical was the island's top communist, a Chinese paid agent, and a pro-Peking Stalinist. One journalist even called him a madman for ushering in the Red takeover in East Africa. Wow, they were consistent, boy. The Post of the Times, boy. Moving from a scathing critique of the U.S. media coverage of the Congo to drawing a link between civil rights protests and the segregated American, South, and African anti-colonial national struggles, Malcolm tried to humanize Babu without feeding the heroic myth of the revolutionary figure. It's interesting, as Malcolm is humanizing Babu, there's all these debates and discussions, as somewhat will be discussed here, of the attempt to, the claim to be humanizing Malcolm. Malcolm highlights the individual agency involved in selecting friends. He develops a criterion of friendship based on a set of values, and he identifies its political utility. He was performing a type, with Babu by his side, he was performing a type of political friendship, and he spent the last year of his life trying to define. So here's what I thought was interesting, and this is why I, again, continued to say that our attempt to critique this work and continue to offer a discussion of that criticism is important, because Manning Marable's book, again, as I predicted at the time, continues, even though this is just a couple years after the book's publication, to be the centerpiece for a lot of scholarship that as not only was it coming out then, but as I just did for today's show, find in research. So while I like what this article does in offering a new kind of criticism of Marable's work, I still like to think that what we did in our attempt with a live reinvention and just a continuing discussion engages critically Marable's work is important. And please do check the previous episodes of this series even for more of that. So, but as it says, as the author says here, Marable says that his primary purpose was to go beyond the legend, to recount what actually occurred in Malcolm's life. What ends up happening, as the author says here, despite Marable's efforts to write a personal biography, one may still leave the book wondering if Malcolm X had any friends by the time he was assassinated in February 1965. Marable pays attention to his marriage with Betty Shabazz in a way that questions and criticizes Malcolm's views on women and his role as a family man. When Malcolm's friends are discussed, Marable locates Malcolm in the familiar role of mentor and teacher, which exposes the limits of these friendships due to generational differences. But longer story short, what the author is saying here ends up happening in the sort of narrow frame that Marable brings to bear on this subject, as we would argue he did with many others, but where we overlap in our criticisms is that the narrow frame Marable brings to Malcolm in whatever context leaves little room for an in-depth analysis of Malcolm X in a global context. His internationalism is both suppressed and reframed in a way that weakens, in my words, the radical nature of those internationalist politics. These sources, often referenced by biographers of Malcolm X, are rarely interpreted for their subtleties and insights into the nature of Malcolm's internationalism. Precisely because Marable focuses on the deterioration of Malcolm X's friendships at home, I look abroad to Africa to challenge this interpretation of Malcolm's final years. We even talked a little bit about it last week in looking at the diaries. The political friendships, at minimum, that Malcolm had evolved with expats in Ghana who brought him over there. Abdul Rahman Muhammad Babu offers a series of moments. In examining this interrelationship between travel and friendship, I look at the development of Malcolm X's relationship with Tanzanian radical Abdul Rahman Muhammad Babu over a series of moments. Each encounter has a distinct impact on the ways in which Malcolm thinks through friendship. Malcolm's increasing identification with Africa, the possibilities and limitations of the political strategies abroad, the expansion of his vision of Black global citizenship and human rights, what Marable calls his pan-Africanist internationalist perspective, can be partially attributed to his friendship with Babu. And then I like how he phrases Marable, he refers to it as Marable's Malcolm. While Marable identifies Babu's importance to Malcolm's story, he pays very little attention to the nature and significance of their relationship and its implications for how we are to interpret his extensive travels abroad. This was something that we highlighted as a major point of criticism. And several of our contributors even made the comparison of the recently passed Marika Sherwood's work in her review of Malcolm's diaries versus how Marable reviewed the diaries. Certainly how Herb and Don and well, that's the CIA book, this book in discussion, but certainly how Herb Boyd or I would have interpreted Malcolm's diaries. And I don't even mean to phrase it that way. That came out. I don't mean to put myself in that category, but since I'm the one here talking right now, that's the only reason I'm including myself. Is someone who would be in league even at the the long end of the other side of at the end of the line of folks who were pointing out Marable didn't do justice to Malcolm's internationalism. The author here says that they lean on French philosopher Jacques Derrida. I really don't know anything about Derrida. but I thought to note that in The Politics of Friendship, he explores the complex array of political concepts generated from the European intellectual tradition by tracing how friendship as a concept gives definition to the political experience. But the author says, I draw on David Scott's theoretical insights into Black collective memory to show how Malcolm X uses the historic past, particularly racialized slavery in the Americas, to elevate and justify independent African states as primary allies of the Black freedom struggle in the U.S. And that is a very important
message.
Absolutely. On one level, this essay in part critiques the limits of Marable's biography for privileging a nationally bound historical reading of Malcolm's life and legacy. The disintegration of personal relationships at home conveyed in the biography serves as a point of departure for revisiting Malcolm X as an international in an international context that I argue reveals both a narrative and theory of friendship in the making. I propose a reconsidered conceptual terrain upon which Malcolm X positions himself as one of the foremost Black radical thinkers on friendship in the post-World War II era. Only 8 months apart in age, Malcolm X, born 1925, and Abdul Rahman Muhammad Babu, born 1924, were from opposite sides of the globe, from different national cultural contexts, and divergent historical national experiences of oppression and resistance. Yet a brief sketch of their personal lives, as shaped by their national-oriented activism during the 1950s and the early 1960s, reveals striking similarities between their respective political experiences, which would serve as the basis of their political friendship in 1964. Babu's development as a nationalist leader also began to take shape in the 1950s, as did Malcolm's, which has been covered much more extensively even in our series here. After graduating from Makerere University in Uganda, Babu spent the early 1950s studying abroad in England. Immersion in London's transnational and leftist political culture acquainted him with theories and histories of communism, socialism, anarchism, and pan-africanism. During the late 1950s, both men were influenced by the Bang Dung movement and the rise of Third World revolutionaries. And both would be impacted by and have some attempted influence on the development of the Organization of African Unity. And then there's some comparison in terms of their situation relative to each of their struggles. Malcolm was operating along the margins of the civil rights movement at home and nationalist struggles abroad at a time when they had intensified. Malcolm later summed it up quite poignantly in his remarks delivered at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama on February 3rd, 1965, to a group of Black college students who were engaged in such direct action protest activities throughout the Deep South. Elijah believes that God is going to come and straighten things out. I believe that too. But whereas Elijah is willing to sit and wait, I'm not willing to sit and wait. I am not willing to sit and wait on God to come. If he doesn't come soon, it will be too late. I believe in religion, but a religion that includes political, economic, and social action designed to eliminate some of these things and make a paradise here on earth while we're waiting for the other. I believe in brotherhood, but my religion does not blind me to the fact that I am living in a society where brotherhood cannot exist. Happy Easter. Unable to resist the pull of global anti-colonial nationalist activity and its imagined benefits for the U.S. Black freedom movement, Malcolm repeatedly spoke out in favor of decolonization and armed revolutionary struggle and in opposition to U.S. foreign policies in the third world. We need help from our brothers in Africa who have won their independence, and we begin to show them our thinking has expanded on an international scale, And when we begin to show them our thinking has expanded to an international scale, they will step in and help us. And you'll find that Uncle Sam will be in a most embarrassing position. Malcolm's use of the terms brother and friend might appear interchangeable. However, the former is in reference to Africans writ large, and its very usage is marked by a profound sense of racial kinship rooted in the memory of transatlantic slavery. All Africans are brothers to African Americans because of this historical past, but this does not automatically make them friends to the Black freedom struggle of the 1960s or 2025. In May 1963, a year after imprisonment by British colonial authorities for sedition and 7 months before the country's first elections, Babu left the ZMP on the grounds of its elitist brand of Arab nationalism to form the Umma Party. Karl Marx's ideas of working class consciousness and historical materialism, V.I. Lenin's ideas of the youth and party vanguard, and Mao Zedong's ideas on the role of the peasantry in fomenting protracted revolution informed the Umma Party's radical politics. By 1964, Babu was the second most powerful political thinker on the small independent island, second only of Zanzibar, second only to the new president Abid Karume of the Afro-Shirazi Party. The new revolutionary government immediately sought to reorient the nation towards scientific socialism. In March, while attending 122 Nation Non-Aligned Conference, that's March 1964, on economic development, Babu summed up his vision for Zanzibar and world affairs when he claimed that post-revolutionary government sought to limit the power of great monopolies and break out of a constricting framework of a colonial economy. An analysis of Babu's letters reveal how this travels. This is Malcolm X, whose travels throughout the continent of Africa and this so-called Middle East showed an evolving political perspective where he referred to the long-lost brothers of Africa, interested in every aspect of our plight. When he returned to the United States in late May, he continued like Babu to follow an independent political path by forming the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Whereas Babu was using the apparatus of the state to push forward his anti-imperialist position and work within a framework of friendship defined by non-alignment and pan-Africanism, Malcolm began viewing these radical independent states like Zanzibar as potential new friends. It would be great if more, or to the extent that it's not, or to the extent that it is, let me say it that way, it's great in 2025 that leaders of struggles here in the United States are making that connection to burgeoning movements in and throughout the African continent and the rest of the world, and hopefully the new formations, state or otherwise, that emerge as a result can link up with struggles here in the U.S. Because I don't think it's changed the extent to which the argument Malcolm was making that each struggle benefits from the other. And it seems irrational to wed ourselves here in the United States exclusively to the United States. The models put forth suffered from a lack. Oh, this is where he does. He says that Malcolm's hadn't fully evolved a conceptual clarity around his Pan-African and non-aligned solidarity. That is, this is our aim, he said. It's rough. We have to smooth it up some, but we're not trying to put together something that is smooth. We don't care how rough it is. We don't care how tough it is. We don't care how backward it may sound. Yeah, I like that. We'll figure it out. And if it's not smooth, it don't need to be smooth. It just needs to do what it's going to do. More reference to how both men sought to bring their struggles respectively, not only into some sort of solidarity and unity, but to bring them to the United Nations, where again we're seeing some reactionary trends, even some or tendencies, even some that want to claim Malcolm or claim to be an improved Malcolm, who are doing the exact opposite, foregoing international support and saying, no, we just need the United States. In fact, we don't want to be connected into any international struggles. It was hoped that by cultivating allies, sympathizers, and supporters in the formerly colonized world, his organization could help transform the question of racial justice for African Americans into an international one. Now, this was interesting to me. I definitely am understudied in some of these aspects, particular to Tanzania. But in April 1964, Presidents Nyerere and Karume orchestrated a union between Tanganyika and Zanzibar, which stripped Babu of the position of Zanzibar as the foreign affairs minister, and slowed the pace of revolutionary change unfolding on the island. But Babu had come to the OAU as one of Tanzania's foremost pan-Africanists, an asset to the new government in shaping both economic and foreign policy. This position of state power proved critical to how he would come to see the political utility in a friendship with Malcolm X. Many years later, he recounted the first time he met Malcolm X in Cairo. I met him for the first time in Cairo when there was a crucial meeting of the second summit of the OAU. Malcolm came to my room in a very ambivalent mood because at that very moment, Harlem was burning. The youth in uprising was calling for Malcolm, and Malcolm was in two minds. He wanted to go back, to come back and lead the struggle and be with the people in the struggle. But we wanted him to remain there in the conference so as to give us the feeling of the struggle and to convey to all the third world leaders what America, the real America, were going through. I'm glad to report that we succeeded in detaining him there. Malcolm X had the vision to see the threat a united third world would pose to imperialism. Here, Babu interprets Malcolm's presence at the OAU meeting as evidence of his progression towards a revolutionary political orientation. But for Malcolm, the basis of friendship, however, rests on the extent to which Africans and African states embrace a diaspora consciousness. So that's why, again, this distinction between brothers and friends. The document, then he knows, the OAU document, when, that they struggled, as we talked about, was it last week or the week before? The OAU didn't fully receive Malcolm in his argument in the way that he had hoped, and their statement was insufficient, and ultimately took the very limited perspective that the American civil rights movement was sufficient in addressing the crisis here. Which, as Mabel notes, the press in this country, in the U.S., gloated over. But obviously, elements that had not fully won the day, but that still existed, led and most represented by Nkrumah, were still there. So there was still the idea that potential threat of Pan-African unity at the level Malcolm was talking about could, in fact, evolve. Here, more reference to Malcolm's travel diary, which he says here reads like snippets of a conversation he is having with himself. Remember, I said I mentioned a little bit of that last week. You just see sort of jotted down almost out of nowhere, just bits of thought that Malcolm was having and trying to capture. Although Malcolm stops short of harshly criticizing leaders, he expresses outbursts of irritation at African heads of state opposed to President Nkrumah's call for immediate continental unification. Most notably, President Julius Nyerere stated that, quote, to that step-by-step method so Nyerere was criticizing Nkrumah, who was saying we can't do this step by step. We got to just unite Africa and boom. But Nyerere said to say that the step-by-step method was invented by the imperialists is to reach the limits of absurdity. I have heard the imperialists blamed for many things, but not for the limitations of mankind. They are not God. In his diary, Malcolm sided with Nkrumah's position on immediacy while adding, I didn't like Nyerere's attacks on Nkrumah. It was pleasing only to the West and its stooges. Malcolm did meet with Tanzanian ministers, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Bibi Titi Mohammed, head of the women's wing of the ruling party, apparently winning them over with his sense of humor and open-mindedness. Malcolm also spent considerable time with Babu, who acted informally as his government host. Although Malcolm's travel diary on his Tanzania visit is not incredibly detailed, he describes Babu as friendly and well-informed and extremely alert man. Malcolm wrote on October 12th, and dedicated to what he believes. At a dinner with Babu and his family, Malcolm was informed of his meeting with the president, that is, that Babu had arranged for him to meet Nyerere. The news caused him to later write in his diary, I was elated. By all accounts, President Nyerere was not as elated as Malcolm. In fact, it took consistent pleading from Babu as well as from Kambona. Nyerere finally relented and consented to a 3-minute meet and greet. To understand Nyerere's reluctance to meet with Malcolm X, one needs to only look at the Tanzanian president's record of anti-colonial activity. TANU's, that his political party's adherence to a policy of nonviolence and interracial harmony, corresponded more directly with the liberal civil rights agenda of Martin Luther King than the militant black nationalist agenda promoted by Malcolm X. However, Malcolm wins him over. They end up building for many more hours. He turns that 3-minute meeting into several hours of meetings. And then uses that in post-meeting press conferences to inform the world and anyone who would listen that Nyerere was much more of an anti-colonial threat than some may have thought, and was open at minimum to what Malcolm was offering politically. Another point of contention had to do with the question of armed struggle. As Bill Sales notes in his discussion about the OAAU. I think we're going to do, we talked a little bit about this as well. Malcolm's reference to China and what that meant for him in terms of the importance of land. Getting past image barriers that were created to disunify the African diaspora. But both men, that is Babu and Malcolm, resisted that in their work. Babu arrived in New York sometime in late November of 1964 as part of a Tanzanian delegation to the 6th Ordinary Session of the United Nations General Assembly, a few days after Malcolm returned to the United States. They both not only met, but talked about their similar criticism of how the world ultimately did not come to the defense of Patrice Lumumba. Babu agreed to speak on 3 separate occasions to Malcolm's OAAU, where they both talked about and criticized and condemned the image-making press, overcoming attempts to disunify the diaspora. Malcolm would point out that in that speech that Babu was his friend, brother, and family. Based on Malcolm X's summation of the speech, Babu relayed an overarching message of friendship by showing that as long as we think we're over here in America, isolated and all by ourselves, we are underdogs and will act in that way. And this caused, of course, the FBI great concern. And again, that's why we have to, I think, continue to be critical of, as much as possible of these efforts to increasingly popularizing to encourage Black people in the United States to isolate and focus on and to encourage continental Africans, particularly those who make their way over here from a particular class background, to disassociate for these struggles. It only weakens everyone. Following the rally, informants were urged to continue to attend those rallies to report back on African leaders and other foreign delegates in attendance, including Babu, Ahmed Hassan of Sudan, and Ernesto Che Guevara of Cuba. Again, this is the work that the OAAU, Malcolm's organization, was doing at the end of his life, featuring Babu and other internationalists and pan-Africanists, encouraging united anti-colonial struggles. One journalist noted that before a politically diverse interracial crowd of nationalists, socialists, Muslims, communists, and Garveyites, Babu addressed the Zanzibar Revolution and the Congo crisis in a way that made these political lines vanish. OAAU member Peter Bailey OAAU member Peter Bailey's report on the speech was featured in the OAAU's journal Blacklash. According to Bailey, Babu was relentless in his attack on the United States, asserting that imperialist countries just don't understand that the African countries are determined to plan their own destinies. Shout out to A. Peter Bailey. Malcolm was most effective in making a sharp friend or foe distinction when addressing external forces, especially the United States. But when it came to making such an important distinction in the context of Africa, Malcolm's thoughts read incomplete. He was full of praise for how travel broadened his political thinking, for which his conversations with African heads of state were responsible. It is clear that he was influenced by Kwame Nkrumah, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ahmed Ben Bella, Jomo Kenyatta, Sekou Touré, and Julius Nyerere, but for a different set of reasons. Methods of resistance adopted to win independence and domestic policies that empower African women were two prominent identifiers of friendly African states. More specifically, he was coming to the conclusion that Tanzania held enormous importance to the Black freedom struggle, describing it as one of the most militant and uncompromising independent states in Africa. Clearly, the emergence of independent states disrupted how Pan-Africanism as an intellectual project was imagined, as a political project was practiced. Clearly, the emergence of independent states disrupted how Pan-Africanism as an intellectual project was imagined and as a political project was practiced. But Malcolm was either not fully prepared or inclined to critique nation-state formation in a way that posed specific leaders in a negative light. The project of friendship making, however, had to be understood historically from the perspective that privileges Black identity formations. Malcolm was insistent upon this point because Africans on the continent were gaining their freedom by any means necessary at a faster rate than African Americans. Malcolm surmised that colonial representations of the savage and primitive image associated with African ways of being had a greater cultural and psychological effect on the latter group. So because Africans were decolonizing by any means necessary faster than Black people here in the US, his argument was the psychological warfare was more effective on us here. He said at the London School of Economics, you can't hate the land, your motherland, the place that you come from, and we can't hate Africa without ending up hating ourselves. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that point, by the way, especially given where I see some of the arguments around disunity are popularizing, or yeah, that although at this point, given the state, I don't know. That's interesting. We are in the seat of empire, even if it is in decline. Anyway, Malcolm closes his speech with one of his most forceful statements on diaspora and consciousness as a precondition to political friendships with Africa. The same beat, the same heart, the same pulse that moves the black man on the African continent, despite the fact that 400 years have separated us from the mother continent, an ocean of water has separated us from the mother continent. Still, the same pulse that beats in the black man on the African continent today is beating in the heart of the black man in North America, Central America, South America, and in the Caribbean. Many of them don't know, but it's true. The stress on cultural loss and psychological distance caused by being taken from the African continent, rather than on a narrative of resistance, is not bad history, as Mabel suggests. I am inclined to read Malcolm's narrative of total victimhood as memory making, designed to perform a political function for understanding present conditions of oppression and global black resistance, and forging new friendships based on, but not limited to, race. For the record, I don't have access to the hard copy, my hard copy immediately, but I did look in the Kindle copy of Mabel's book, and I could not find the phrase "bad history" at all, or reference to this. So I'm not saying it's not there. I just couldn't find it. Maybe I have to. But I did want to just check to see how Mabel, more of the context for this point that is being said here. But in again, my bias is that Mabel did not properly interpret a lot of things that Malcolm was saying. So it stands to reason this would have happened too. I just could not find this particular reference. But it makes sense with what I've argued and seen but I would have liked to. I mean, I'll just look again. Or if any of you find it, he says it's on page 408. Again, I don't have the hard copy. The page number, the pagination is a little bit different with Kindle. But anyway, word search didn't reveal this phrase. The individual searches on each word didn't reveal the phrase. So, and I could not find. But anyway, I didn't spend that much time with it. I invite, if any of you find that particular reference and note any difference in context, please let me know or put it in the comments. But after Malcolm is assassinated, Babu, in reference to the assassination itself, is quoted here saying Malcolm's death represented an end of an existing epoch in the Afro-American struggle for justice and equality. Malcolm was written about in many parts of the anti-colonial nationalist world as a third world revolutionary martyr. But Babu continued sort of the political friendship that he had built with Malcolm after Malcolm's assassination through, I thought, a similar approach to journalism that both men had, and that I think all of us should have, hence emancipatory journalism. But in serving as an editorialist for The Nationalist from 1964 to 68, Babu would confront the very issue of print media and representation that preoccupied Malcolm's thinking during his final years of his life. His weekly column, Pressman's Commentary, best illustrates the friendly ways in which Babu responded to Malcolm's political project, consistently addressing the Black freedom struggle in the U.S. and its relevance to African liberation. Babu would also serve as an important international contact for activists, continuing that kind of political friendship post Malcolm's assassination. Against the backdrop of Manning Marable's biography, this essay has attempted to situate Malcolm X's thought and practice within the broader international context. We may ask whether or not there is a need for a Black radical politics of friendship in the present historical moment. Ever since President Barack Obama took office in 2008, Black intellectuals have found themselves in a bit of a crisis in their reluctance to engage in the kinds of sharp social and political criticism of U.S. government leadership and policies, central themes of Black radical intellectual work. And I note here that he cites Peniel Joseph's book on Barack Obama and Malcolm X, and I am hoping it is done here to point out that Joseph is an example of what the author here is saying is the crisis of Black intellectuals in their reluctance to engage in the kinds of sharp social and political criticism of U.S. government leadership and politics. Because Joseph's work, again, much like his mentor Marable's, does everything it can do to situate Malcolm X or Barack Obama rather, as a political heir or descendant rather, or both, of Malcolm X, as opposed to Barack Obama being what he should be understood of and always have been understood of as the political antithesis to Malcolm X, the attempt to negate Malcolm X. So I hope that's what he's doing here. That is the author of this article. But perhaps more importantly, that the goal is to remind of Africa's geopolitical importance in world affairs and its continued exploitation by foreign governments and multinational corporations. And I would add its continued importance as a center of our focus for struggle and the liberation of Black people here in the United States and everywhere throughout the diaspora. So, good people, I hope you enjoyed that even nearly as much as I did for another week's look at 100 years of Malcolm X, and in this case, again, at the importance of his internationalism, his pan-africanism, his militancy, as it seemed to be increasing even at the end of his life. And so, yeah. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org for more. Please do put this in your socials. Invite others to join the conversation. Put your comments in the comments. Salute again to the undefeated chat. Wish you all well. Please make sure you have the bell rung and are checking all the content coming out on the platform. And as always, peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time here again for more.
And what did you sacrifice? Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight have set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.